What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another edition of Pistons Daily, where you can find daily content covering all things Detroit Pistons, Monday through Friday. As always, I am your host. My name is Kyle Garrison. I'm over on Twitter at Kyle Garrison2, where I talk all things Detroit sports. So head over there, give me comments, questions, concerns, episode ideas. I'd love to hear from all you guys. Also, shout out to everyone who tunes in every single day. We are on the road to 2,000 subscribers, so if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way to help support the channel. With that being said, let's jump into a Wednesday edition of Pistons Daily. So first things first, as always, our skill of the day. And I just want to talk about Tobias Harris' efficiency around the rim and in the short mid-range and even in the mid-range last year. So he shot 74% from the rim, which was in the 92nd percentile amongst qualified forwards last year in the regular season. That went down a little bit in the playoffs to 62%, which is expected just with the intensity increasing defensively in the playoffs. But when you're looking at his mid-range game, he shot 49% from short mid-range and 45% overall from mid-range in the regular season. And then in the playoffs, he shot 46% from mid-range. So he had a little bit of an improvement there. And we saw from an offensive standpoint, he had a very solid playoffs. Defensively, he was unbelievable. But when you're just looking specifically at his offensive game, there is a lot to like, and there's a lot to like in the fact that he's a heavy isolation player who's still very efficient. A lot of times when you see, especially forwards or small forwards or power forwards who kind of predicate themselves on isolation games, sometimes they take bad shots and sometimes they start to kind of start to become shot chuckers. But I don't think that that's the case with Tobias. There's some times here and there last year where he did get a little overzealous and try to take over a little bit. But there was also times when he was able to take over, and there was 5 straight possessions where he was able to get to his spot, kind of on that right side elbow block area, and he was able to kind of dominate his defender, shoot over the top, and it was very successful. So there's a lot to just like. I know the age is a little bit of a concern from a lot of the fan base, but if he continues to produce offensively, he can be such a valuable piece for this team. And that's just outside of isolation scoring as well, because defensively we know what he can bring, what we saw in the playoffs. But again, as an isolation scorer, there's a lot to like from what he brings. He was also great in catch and shoot opportunities. I think he made 77% of his shots when assisted by Cade Cunningham. So again, a lot to like about him having him in the starting lineup alongside Cade Cunningham. We know what he can bring. Clearly last year, they were a very good dynamic duo there. So again, it's going to be interesting to see if he can kind of translate what he brought to the table last year to this year. He is 33 years old, and there might be a little bit of a regression just in terms of overall production. But I do think that he's going to take less shots, but he's still going to be very efficient. And when you do need a bucket at the end of a shot clock, he's a guy that you can rely on. His efficiency is high enough. I mean, again, he was in the 92nd percentile in the regular season at the rim when it came to power forwards, and that's not really what he does best. His game is kind of that lull you to sleep, back you down, shoot over the top. But even when he was able to get to the rim and be physical down there, he was very efficient at the cup. So it's going to be really, really fun to kind of watch how he meshes with this young core and kind of the new developed skills of Ausar Thompson, Jaden Ivey, and Ron Holland. And it'll be interesting to see where Tobias Harris fits in the mix. But I do think that he will find a place in this rotation and be an effective piece for this team in the 2025 season. But moving on, another topic I wanted to touch on was just a collective group of ESPN insiders put together their top 100 and released 100 through 51. And Jaden Ivey comes in at 85. Tobias comes in at 84. Nobody else was featured in that 100 through 51. Ausar Thompson was listed as young stars that could make the list next year. And I don't want to talk about Ausar too much, but I expect he'll be in the top 100 and potentially even the top 50 next year, because I expect him to have a breakout year and be very, very solid for this team. And then again, Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey should be in that top 50. I would be remiss if Jalen Duren doesn't make that top 50. But I do think that he will be in the mid 40s to early 40s, maybe even creeping into that top 30. but I do think he will be around 45 to 46, somewhere along there. So we'll touch on that when they release the rest of the rankings. But for now, I just wanted to talk about the two players featured, and that is, like I mentioned, Jaden Ivey at 85. And they write, 3 years into his NBA career, and it's still fair to wonder what exactly to make of Jaden Ivey and his long-term fit in Detroit. He played only 30 games last season before a season-ending injury forced him to watch the team's playoff run from the sidelines. Before the injury, he was showing signs of breakout, recording 17.6 points per game on 46% shooting, 41% from three, both of which were career highs, but he never got to play out his full potential. Now extension eligible on his rookie contract, Ivey will have something to prove this season. Can he be a major part of Detroit's next playoff run? And that was by Jamel Collier from ESPN. And I do think he can be a major part of a playoff run for Detroit this year. I think he's going to start right away, and they're going to give him free reign to be a very good off-ball scorer next to Cade Cunningham, but they're also going to give him the flexibility to be a secondary ball handler, and hopefully we see that part of his game kind of come to fruition. The signature stat for Ivey was last season he shot 41% on threes, 46% on catch and shoot threes before his January 1st injury. And then his fantasy projection this year is 17.6 points, 4.1 rebounds, 4.4 assists. I think that's very fair to have him around there. I could see him being an 18, 19 point per game scorer, and the Pistons might actually need him to be an 18 to 19 to 20 point per game scorer if they want to kind of replicate what they did offensively last year. So again, a lot is predicated on just what Jaden Ivey is going to be this year, but obviously, ESPN has him at 85, and that's very, very high for a guy who only played 30 games last year. And I think this might be the lowest that Jaden Ivey is on this list over the next 8 to 10 years. I do think that he's going to break out this year, and we're going to see him in the top 70, top 60, top 50 of these lists. And it might not even be for the Pistons. The Pistons still have to extend him, and if they choose not to and he ends up elsewhere, I do think he's going to be a very solid player in the future. I do hope that it is in Detroit, though. And then Tobias Harris, I'll read what they wrote about him. So they said, Harris carved out a role for himself to help revitalize the Pistons en route to a playoff berth. At 33 years old, he's one of the veteran leaders, and his 13.7 points, 5.9 rebounds, and 47% shooting don't tell the whole story of his total impact. Pistons coach J.B. Bickerstaff often referred to him as this team's safety blanket, a calming, reliable force on and off the court for one of the league's youngest teams, making a turnaround from the bottom of the standings to the postseason. The signature stat, as I mentioned these earlier in our skill of the day, Harris shot 66% on layups and dunks last season, his best since 2013. He also shot 77% on 31 attempts off passes from Cade Cunningham. 31 attempts seems a little low. Not sure where that stat's coming from. So again, I mentioned that in the skill of the day. If I'm wrong on that, call me out. I apologize for that. But it is written right here on this ESPN article. Maybe they mean just layups and dunks. But then again, 77% is still ridiculous if that is the case. And then his fantasy projection is 14.1 points, 5.8 rebounds, 2.3 assists. So ESPN actually has Tobias Harris scoring more points per game this year. And I mentioned it again in Skill of the Day, so I won't get too into it, but his game is built to last a long time in this league, and every single year he's finding new ways to become valuable. So if he were to improve his points per game production, I wouldn't be surprised whatsoever. He's going to be relied on as that main starting power forward with potentially Asar Thompson and Ron Holland filling some of those minutes, but I still think Tobias Harris is going to play a ton next year, and he's going to be a huge piece of how far this team can go. So I am very, very excited to see what Tobias Harris can bring to the table. And I think that ranking at 84 is very fair for him. This might be his last year on one of these top 100 lists. But then again, like I mentioned, he could still be a top 100 player into season 34, season 35. It'll be on a newer contract, obviously much less than what he's making right now, but he can still provide very, very solid minutes. And he's just made a path for himself in the NBA as being a glue guy, being a safety blanket, like J.B. Bickerstaff mentioned. And I really like what Tobias brings to the table, especially filled with a team of just very, very young, raw prospects. And he's kind of Uncle T. He's the guy they rely on to, hold everybody down. And I think that'll be the case once again this year. But let me know in the comments if you think that 84 and 85 respectively are fair rankings for Tobias Harris and Jaden Ivey, or if you'd have them higher or lower on this list. Let me know, comment section down below. But moving on, I thought this was a really cool article that Bleacher Report did, and basically they just did one word to describe every team this offseason and every team's offseason. And for the Pistons, they said trusting. So I like that, and I'll just read the blurb real quick. I think this was done by Grant Hughes. Yeah, this is Grant Hughes over at Bleacher Report, and he writes, Karis LeVert and Duncan Robinson could be neutral value replacements for Dennis Schroeder and Malik Beasley, assuming the latter doesn't return. But it's hard to argue the Detroit Pistons' new additions make the team meaningfully better. That won't matter much if the young players already on the roster improve as the team expects. If Jaden Ivey fully recovers from last year's season-ending injury, he could build on the growth he showed in 30 healthy games. He and Jalen Duren are both eligible for extensions. It could boost their earning power with big years, assuming they don't ink deals this offseason. Asar Thompson and Ron Holland II could further ratchet up Detroit's defensive intensity, and an offensive leap from either prospect could start all-star trajectory talk. Maybe the Pistons' moves feel insignificant, but it's tough to quibble with the faith this team is showing in its young core. At the very least, last year's wildly impressive 44 wins has earned the in-house talent a shot to validate the organization's trust. Great article right there from Grant Hughes, so go check that out if you haven't already. One word to describe every team's offseason. But I just thought that's very, very well put. This team is putting a ton of faith that Jaden Ivey can become an elite combo guard, that Asar Thompson is going to be a top 5 defender in the sport and kind of fill out his offensive holes in his game. They think Ron Holland is going to develop a jumper and be a guy that can provide floor spacing for this team going forward. Jalen Duren is supposed to make a defensive leap and also continue to improve on the offensive production he brought to the table last year. Cade Cunningham is being relied on to take that next step and continue to be a top 10 player in the NBA. And all of these things are good, as they should. The front office should trust in these guys. They should trust in the development of their young core, and putting trust into untrustworthy things is a recipe for disaster. But that is not what Trajan Langdon and this front office are doing right now. The young core is supposed to grow together, and they're supposed to grow their individual skill set so they can mesh on the court, all as one unit. And these are all things these are expectations to happen. We saw what they did last year, and they're all so young. There should be no question that they're going to improve overall. This isn't a hope and pray scenario. This is a scenario the Pistons have drawn up, they've thought about, they've been diligent about going out and executing on, and this offseason proved that. JB Bickerstaff and Trajan Langdon are all on the same page right now. They want to put these guys in the best positions to be successful, and I anticipate a ton of growth amongst everyone. I think it's very important that they didn't go out and make a huge addition. Instead, they are relying, like I've mentioned a million times, relying on that young core to continue to improve. And this year is going to be very telling on whether or not that's going to be a successful blueprint going forward, or if they are going to have to go out and make additions to fill some of those holes. And then again, we could still see a scenario where the Pistons are very, very good and they still want to add at the deadline and make a big splash to actually compete for the Eastern Conference and compete for an NBA title. Or we could also see a scenario where you see Jaden Ivey doesn't really make those leaps that you expect from him, so you go out and you add, or you think of a different plan. You come up with a backup plan if that's going to be the case, but I don't see that being the case. I do see everyone kind of developing and on the right trajectory, and I see some big leaps from Asar Thompson in the near future, from Jalen Duren, hopefully from Jaden Ivey and Ron Holland, and Isaiah Stewart as well. And then obviously Cade Cunningham is kind of, it just expected, and it's a no-brainer that he's going to improve. And I do think that it's very, very just nice to know that this front office and JB Bickerstaff, they have trust in these guys to make those improvements, because they're the guys that are making the decisions behind the scenes. They're seeing what's going down. They're seeing the work put in, and they're trusting in the process like the 76ers did. But hopefully they have a better result than kind of what the trust the process era was for the Sixers. But again, super encouraging that this young core is making those strides, and we'll continue to touch on it, talk about it during training camp, what skills are kind of showing up, and just what different players are adding to their bag. in a year where the Pistons are expected to compete for an Eastern Conference. But last topic before we end the show. So SB Nation dropped their top 9 MVP candidates entering the 2025 season. I won't talk about this too much, but this was by Ricky O'Donnell, like I mentioned, over at SB Nation. And he has number 9, Donovan Mitchell, number 8, Anthony Edwards, number 7, Jalen Brunson, number 6, Alperen Sengun, number 5, Victor Wembanyama, number 4, Giannis Antetokounmpo, number 3, Luka Doncic, number 2, Nikola Jokic, number 1, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. So obviously, Cade Cunningham is not on this list. Cade has a better shot at MVP over Donovan Mitchell, Alperen Sengun, Jalen Brunson, and I'll say it, Victor Wembanyama. He has a better chance than all 4 of those players. Anthony Edwards is a toss-up. They're both very young players, but I do think the usage rate and the passing ability that Cade Cunningham brings to the table, he has more of an impact on winning than a guy like Anthony Edwards. Obviously, Ant is unbelievable player in this league. I love watching him play, but Cade Cunningham is elite in multiple areas of the game, and I just think not having him on this top 9 list is criminal. I mean, yes, the above players that I mentioned that Cade could be ahead of, they can score the ball. So can Cade. Yes, Victor Wembanyama is an elite defender. Cade isn't elite, but he's very, very, very good, and he's also a much better passer and scorer than Victor Wembanyama. He's a better facilitator, like I mentioned, than everyone on this list, maybe besides Luka Doncic, but only time will tell. I do think that Cade is going to be a better passer this year than Luka Doncic. I think they'll be very, very close. They're both very talented in that aspect of the game, but Cade's younger. He's improving at a higher clip from year to year, and I expect him to be a 9 to 10 assists per game guy once again. So I think he affects winning more than any of the players on this list outside of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Nikola Jokic, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. Maybe Luka Doncic, but again, we'll see. I do think that Cade has a very good chance of surpassing Luka Doncic as the second best point guard in the NBA this year. Probably going to be a hot take, but I do think that is a very real possibility. If it doesn't happen, I'm not going to be shocked. But if it does happen, I'm going to, I'm going to definitely look back on all these videos I've made and kind of realize, well, I was right, because Cade is elite. And I know everyone watching this video, I know everyone in the Pistons community, they know that. It's just a matter of time before the NBA media and the rest of the NBA really realize what he can do, because everyone knows that he's a very solid player and that he's approaching superstar level. But I don't think people realize to the extent of how high he can go and what his ceiling truly is in this league. But again, he was 7th last year in MVP voting, and they don't even have him in the top 9. I don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think that we're going to see a regression. I think, in fact, he's going to become a better and a more efficient scorer, and he's going to be better at turning the ball over less. He's going to still be a very good defender, and we're going to see the Pistons have a real shot at winning 48, 49, 50 games this year. And my prediction, this is a very hot take, but my prediction is he finishes top 4 in MVP voting. He finishes just behind Nikola Jokic, SGA, and Giannis Antetokounmpo. He finishes above players like Luka Doncic and Victor Wembanyama and Kevin Durant and some of these elite level talent in the NBA. And that's just my prediction. So we'll have to see if it comes to fruition. I could be totally off on this. He could be outside of that top 9. But again, top 7 last year. I expect him to improve on what he did last year and be a top 10 player in this sport, maybe even up there, top 7, top 6. And my prediction, top 4. But let me know in the comments if you think Cade is the top 9 MVP candidate this year. And if you do, where you see him fitting on this list. I think as of today, I think number 8 would be fine. I think that having him behind Victor Wembanyama, Jalen Brunson, and Anthony Edwards heading into the season is okay. But when we get to that end of the year, I think this list is going to look completely different, and Cade is going to have shot his way up. But that's all I've got for you guys today on a Wednesday edition of Pistons Daily. As always, like, subscribe, comment, turn on post notifications, and follow me on Twitter at Kyle Garrison 2. Also, head over to Spotify, leave a 5-star review and a follow if you can. Once again, thank you all so much for tuning in every single day. That is going to do it here for episode 66 of Pistons Daily, and I will catch you all next time.